North Dakota. This is a Scribe's Journey with your host, Richard Polinelli.
Hey there, readers and writers. Welcome to the first show of A Scribe's Journey. Now, as we mentioned in the opening credits for the show, I've been writing now this is my 36th year writing professionally, and I've done a little bit of everything. You can see the comic book thing just above my head there. That was back in 1985. Before that, I was doing freelance assignments, some crazy stuff. One of the strangest assignments I got was to run out onto a West Texas highway and get a picture of tumbleweeds blowing across. Hey, it was money. You do what you got to do when you're first starting, right? Covered a couple of golf tournaments, covered a high school playoff game, got to go out and write a story about a meteor crater in Odessa, Texas. It's nothing like that big monster that's out in Arizona, but it is there. And we managed to do a nice little story for a local magazine in West Texas back in the 80s. Wound up doing newspapers, started off at the Gallup Independent in New Mexico, worked my way back to my hometown of Turlock, California, worked for the Journal, worked for the Modesto Bee, the Merced Sun Star, I'm leaving out some others, wound up at the end of the road, which was San Francisco Examiner in 2010, and then decided it was time to give fiction writing one more shot. And as you can see over here on this side, I've written a few. Yeah. It's been an interesting journey. It's been an incredible voyage through the decades, and I'm hoping to share a little bit about what I've seen, what I've experienced, some of the things to do, some of the things not to do, and we'll also get into why I'm a independently published author now, even though I started out in 2014 as a traditionally published author. And we'll talk about how that transition happened. We'll have some authors who've done the same thing that I've done. There's a lot of pros and cons, and it's not for everybody. So that's some of the stuff that we're going to cover. So what do you think? We bring on our first guest. We'll get underway. You're going to enjoy this one. He's a great writer. He's got his own show out in California that he hosts that deals with writers. I think you're going to enjoy him. So let's take about 90 seconds, a couple of quick messages, and when we come back, we'll meet this first guest. All right, welcome back. We are back here on A Scribe's Journey, and we have our guest now, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about him before we bring him on. He was born into an Air Force family in 1949 and lived all over the world before they finally settled in Del Mar, California. He's a musician, a historian, a writer, a poet, a playwright. All these things describe Jim Christina. He's a graduate of San Dieguito High School, I hope I pronounced that right, in Encinitas, California, an old reliable university in Washington State. He spent 10 years in the U.S. Army before he joined his father's family's paint business. While managing a territory up in Washington and Oregon, he began composing music and writing the lyrics. He formed a band in Tacoma, Washington called Sundown. His music and the melody of Sundown played up and down the state before Jim moved back to California. For years, a character had been rolling around in his mind, and in 2008, the character became the Hunter, and a series was born. They are stories of an aging manhunter and his protege in Arizona in the last half of the 19th century. The stories are gritty, raw, and accurate in the description of the lives and times of the main characters. If you're looking for Louis L'Amour, you won't find him here. If you're looking for a walloping good story, turn the pages and start reading. And you can also listen to Jim every Thursday evening at 7 o'clock Pacific time in the evening, 10 o'clock East. And for those of us squashed into flyover country, you can work out the hours from there. For the Writer's Block, it's on LA Talk Radio, and you can find that online at latalkradio.com. Search there, find the Writer's Block. If you missed the show live, don't panic. It's all on demand, so you can listen to it whenever you're ready. So let us welcome our guest, Mr. Jim Christina. Jim, welcome to the show.
Yay! Hi, Rich.
Hello, sir. Jim is a character. I can confirm that. And I got the pleasure of spending several months as his co-host on the Writer's Block, and it was a great show. So if you get a chance to catch that,
it's
please
still
do.
a great show.
Yeah, it still is a great show. And you've got, when I left, you had over 500,000. I think you told me the other day you were at 600,000 now, or maybe
a little over 600,000. Yeah.
It's an amazing show. And you've been on what, 3-4 years with that?
We're working on almost 4 years now in April.
Yep. It's, like I said, it's a great show. They have a guest on every week, an author. They talk about their book. The one thing I like about the show is the hosts read the book.
Yep.
And why did you decide on doing that?
Because you can't really, just because their guests are on for the full show, and you can't really discuss a book with your guest unless you've actually read it. It's not a 5-minute segment. It's
right.
40-minute segment.
And I've done the 5-minute segment. That's not
fun. Yeah, and we don't have producers that go through the books and give us the highlights and give us cheat sheets. So it's either we read the book or we don't.
Yeah. Yep. And some of the books are short. I remember a 20-page book that we did.
Yes.
And some are
500-600 pages.
Yeah. What was that one? 832
Yeah,
pages?
one was almost 800. Yeah, it was a long book.
And somehow we got it done. We read the thing. So
yep.
Now you started out, you said in 2008 is when you started writing.
Correct.
But you were, in a way, you were telling stories long before that with the songwriting, because that's basically telling a story, only set to music, and you have a 3 or 4 minute time frame. So you've been writing stories for a long time.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I actually wrote short stories and stuff in high school too. So it's not been an immediate process. It's been over the years.
Yeah.
Sure.
What drew you to writing in the first place?
I'm sorry?
What drew you to writing?
I think I had stories to tell, and I wanted to tell them.
Were they always Western?
Yes.
Okay.
Why?
Any particular reason why?
Roy Rogers, Lone Ranger. I mean, the whole 9 yards.
Everything you grew up with. Yeah. See, for me, I grew up reading Louis L'Amour. So.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, which I think everybody has who enjoys Westerns. They're going to read Louis L'Amour first. Now, when you're writing Westerns, and I can speak to this from experience now because I wrote one with you, you've got to do a lot of research. You can't just, make it up from nothing. There's a lot of research involved. So what do you do when you approach a new story?
Well, first of all, you have to know the time period. That really, really helps. And I have to give that to you, Richard. You were more than gracious in taking the time to learn as I tried to give you hints about what was going on in that time period.
Well, you're the one who wrote Westerns for several years. So I figured I needed to listen to what you were saying.
Well, not only that, but that was my focus when I was in college was the West. Western expansion, 1840, 1890. So it's a lot of stuff I already knew, and a lot of stuff I knew from being in Old West groups and writing, is a RIDING, writing groups. And so you learn about taking care of your animals. You learn about the tack. You learn about what they did, what they didn't do, and it just goes on and on and on and on and on. So.
Right. The one thing I found was when I was writing the one with you is I wanted to include a town in the story. Right. And I wisely double checked to make sure said town was there during the time frame that we did. Right. Because there was 2 cities that would have been in the book that were no longer in the book because they just weren't there at the time.
Right.
How important is it, even though it's a fictional story, to be that accurate?
Pretty important. I mean, there's only one book that I wrote that had a town that in it that didn't exist at the time, and that was Requiem for an Appaloosa, and I included Douglas, Arizona in there, which didn't exist until early 1900s. But I put it in there because it was real close to where they were, so, and they needed supplies, so that's where they went. So I just figured, what the hell? How many people are going to know that Douglas, Arizona didn't exist?
Well, now anybody who watches this will now.
Oh yeah, now they know. I mean, let me look that up.
Yep. Yeah, I went to the extreme I went to in our book, which was The Last Lonely Trail. I actually contacted the El Paso County Sheriff's Department in Colorado Springs and said, do you keep records back to, I think it was 1877, 78? And they go, yeah, sure. I go, well, who was sheriff back then? She goes, well, that's a request we don't get every day. and she was able to find out, and she was kind of surprised that I did that. But I just figured all it takes is one know-it-all out there to say, no, that's not who should have been there.
Right. Yeah. Well, this new book I'm writing, Jefferson's Chance, it takes place in 1875, 1876. And it describes El Paso. And El Paso, it was El Paso Norte, and then El Paso Sur, which is southern and northern, which is now Juarez.
Yeah.
And there was no law in El Paso in 1876. There was none. So the Texas Rangers used to float in and out as they needed. The cavalry would be in and out, but there was no law in El Paso until 1878, 1879, when Dallas Studenmeyer came in and was hired as the city marshal.
Right, in El Paso, Texas, yeah. Which was the other thing I needed to make sure, because Colorado Springs, the county it's in, is El Paso County, and I never have understood why they came up with El Paso for the county, but...
Well, Colorado was a Spanish territory at one time.
Yeah, it was. And with what made me think of this was back on Saturday, they had a Western thing going on one of the movie channels. And I think it's for a few dollars more. Lee Van Cleef's on the train, and he's trying to get off at Tucumcari. Well, in that time period, and Tucumcari was not there.
That's usually.
And I'm like, no, you can't do that. They were, So I always try to do that if I'm dealing with history, is be as accurate as I can, because I'm sure somebody's going to catch me the day I don't.
Well, one thing we did in our book that a lot of people don't do in their Western books is that when Hall and Armstrong went into that one town, they were followed by the posse chasing Hall. And they shot up those two guys in front of the bar, in front of the saloon, and then they told the other guys, "You clean it up, we're leaving."
Yeah, we got our job done. You live here. You deal with this thing.
It's like that poor bastard that ran underneath the sign.
Yeah,
that was genius. That was genius.
That's some of the inventive death scenarios that we
had like 3 or 4 inventive deaths in that book.
There was a couple. I got on a roll there for a while. I will fess up, but I didn't want it just to be your basic classic, shoot 'em up. I wanted a little something to make it a little bit more memorable, and apparently, but at least one of our readers it did, because he was impressed with our inventive death.
Yes.
So
we've got some pretty good reviews on that book.
We have. It was funny because when I wrote it, I had to come up with names for the gang that Hall's chasing. And instead of sitting there trying to come up with Western sounding names, I just put out a call in a writer's group for people who wanted to be red shirted Western style. And for those, red shirt is the Star Trek term for the guys in the red shirts on the show. They always went down with Captain Kirk. They were the ones that got killed. Captain Kirk got a scratch. So I had so many people volunteering. So a lot of the people in that book are actually friends of mine who wind up getting killed in the inventive death scenarios, and they're all fine with it. So.
And again, there were some pretty good death scenarios there.
There were some good ones. I particularly liked the last one. The one we saved for last was good. So, Now, you mentioned Jefferson's Chance, and that's your book that's coming out next month.
Hopefully next month.
Hopefully next month. Why don't you tell us a little bit about Jefferson's Chance?
Jefferson's Chance is a story about a young man who at 10 years old loses his leg to a rattlesnake bite. But he's always wanted to be a Texas
Uh-oh. It looks like
Ranger. Well, I'm sorry?
you froze up there for a second. It's
Oh,
okay.
yeah.
Keep going.
He always wanted to be a Texas Ranger. His father was a Texas Ranger. His name is Jefferson Greeley. And he gets a wooden leg and grows up with this wooden appendage. That's just basically what it was back then, was a carved appendage that just kind of hooked on your leg, and it didn't really, I mean, it was loose, it came off, and all kinds of problems with him. And he complained to a guy named Thomas Griffith, who actually designed the suspension bridge over the Pecos River, or the Brazos River in Waco. First suspension bridge in the United States. The guy's name was Thomas Griffith, real guy, look him up. And Griffith tells him he'll design him a leg. So he does, and it acts and acts just like a real leg, and Jefferson is accepted into the Texas Rangers. And from there, it just gets nastier and nastier and bloodier and bloodier. He's sent to find these two nefarious men who the captain tells him are really took everything from her and took off. And that was months ago. So now he's got a cold trail. He's got to find these two guys, and he runs into another guy, an ex-Texas Ranger named Caleb Stringfeld, who actually was in my book, End of Line. And they hook up together to find these two guys because they're looking for the same guys. But they're already were locked. The renegade Apaches took them out.
Mm-hmm.
So and then it becomes they're chasing the their Comanches, because the Comanches have taken some white captives, some children. And so now they're chasing because they can't just let the children go. They have to go find them and bring them back. And the last quarter of the book is pretty bloody.
I read a snippet. I read a snippet of that back end, and yeah, I can verify.
Comanches don't fight fair.
No. Nope. Well, yeah, that was kind of the rule back then. You know, you didn't fight fair if you wanted to survive. So
whatever you could put on your hands. But they called the Texans. The Comanches hated the Texans, hated them because they would stand their ground. They wouldn't budge, and they really hated the Texas Rangers. They called them the Tejas Tanapu, which was Texas men or Texas Rangers.
Mm-hmm.
And they called the white men hairy mouths because of their, well, you're wearing one, mustache and a beard.
There you go. we do like our facial hair, apparently.
But what they would do is that they would push the children out front if they had captives and they were trying to get to somebody. They would take the warriors with the children and put them up front, because then the white guys, the hairy mouths, wouldn't fire at the children. Well, that obviously didn't work very well, but it did work to a degree.
Yep. Now you, what got you on the trail of writing this book? Because it's a different. I mean, it's a little different.
It's actually a lot different.
Yeah.
I don't know. I just had the idea, it rolled around in my head, and decided to start writing. Jerry's the one that came up with the title.
It's a good title. It kind of works on several different levels. After you've read the book and you kind of figure out what.
Yeah, especially in the last chapter or last two chapters, you find out where the title comes from.
Yeah.
And the guy who built his leg actually is the one who gives you the title of the book. So Jacob Washington. We're locked up together.
Yep. Okay. Now we were talking about historical accuracy in fiction. You wrote a book that is on the list of books that students are required to pick at least one book from and read for an American history class in a college in the United States. I have looked and I cannot find any other book that can make that claim. If somebody can, let me know, because I can't find it. The book is Jonah Blue. And I'm going to let you tell us about Jonah Blue, but I'm going to preface it with this. I've read Louis L'Amour Westerns. I've read Westerns of all different types. Jonah Blue right now to me is the best Western I've ever read. And it's one of the best books I've ever read. So why don't you tell us a little bit about Jonah Blue?
Well, Jonah Blue is, it came to me in a dream, actually. I dreamt the entire story, start to finish. And when I woke up, I just had the story was in my brain and it wouldn't leave. So it meant sitting down and doing the research, and it's about mountain men. And well, actually, it starts out being a mountain man, and then a guide, and then a rancher.
Mm-hmm.
Jonah is a 10-year-old that runs away from home in Canton, Ohio in 1830, and his dream is to become a mountain man. Always wanted to be a mountain man, what they used to call a Rocky Mountain free trapper. And he wound up making his way across the country and on a riverboat going down the Mississippi River heading towards St. Louis. And he is eventually caught. Well, they don't catch him, actually. He hurtles himself overboard and hangs onto a cleat underneath the decking on the side of the boat and gets dragged down the river for a couple hours before he finally drops off and he makes it to shore. And there's an old mountain man sitting there waiting to catch the river tide the next morning. And his name is Rensfeld Doggett. And he talks to Jonah and tells Jonah, well, if you're a man, this is what we do, and we shake hands.
Yeah.
So Jonah says, well, I'm going to be 11, so I guess I'm a man now. And he and Jonah take off on this big adventure, and it's a wonderful story. At least, and thank you for complimenting it, because it is.
Well, no, it's when you first gave it to me to read, and it was before you had published it. You know, it was one of those sit down, you start reading it, and you don't put it back down again until you hit the last page.
Right.
For me anyway, and I think for most of our readers, they're going to feel the same way. It's a great story. It covers the majority of this man's life from, like you said, he was 10 when we meet him,
right?
And you see what drove him to leave home,
right?
So it was just amazingly done, and I was happy that you let me write the foreword to it, because it's the kind of book I would love to write a foreword for. So it was very well written, very well done. And if anybody out there is into Westerns, read that one and then read Jefferson's Chance. Now there's another one you wrote in between that we want to get to, End of Line. And one of the characters, if I'm remembering right, one of the characters from End of Line is going to be showing up in Jefferson's Chance, correct?
That is correct. Jefferson's Chance takes place before End of Line. Yes, Caleb Stringfield.
Okay.
And End of Line tells Caleb Stringfield's story from his young age to his death at End of Line in, I think, 1884.
Yeah.
So, but he winds up being a roving marshal, a town marshal, and they used to do that. They would clean up a town and then leave and go to another town and go to another town and another town. And End of Line is the last town he goes to. And he knows he shouldn't stop there. He knows he needs to move on. Mm-hmm. And every fiber in his being is telling him to move on, but he can't, because he's honor bound to respect his promises.
Yep.
And that's where he dies.
Well, see, now spoilers.
Yeah, well, I did a little bit, but there is characters from previous books in there.
Yeah.
Jeffrey Stryker's in there, and Buck, and Kieran O'Connor, the little bandy Irishman who shows up in a couple of the books. And Big Jim Lynch, Bountiful Jim Lynch, new character Lewis Kennedy, and the Morgan clan, who are just nefarious. They are just badass people, but not as bad as they think they are.
No one ever is, I don't think. I think.
Well, no.
Somewhere along the line, you find out. You know.
Well, it's the whole adage of that. No matter how big and bad you think you are, there's always somebody bigger and badder than you are.
Yep. Now, one thing you brought up Stryker and the Hunter.
Yeah.
And that was actually the first book of yours I ever read. Was The Dark Angel and the Return, and that is out in a book, and I'm going to hold that up right here.
Oh, there it is.
Yeah. And that's another one that if you're into Westerns, because this one, what drew me to this one was you mixed in some supernatural elements. And I love it when you mash together some genres that aren't supposed to go together.
No, they aren't. And it just happened to work out that way because the first story of the Deacon, which actually is the story of the Dark Angel, he is just getting his power just now. He's just made his way to Earth and made his way into the body of a fallen minister. And it's the guy is not very nice.
No.
And at the end of that first part of the book, he is killed off. And the second part of the book is he has come back and taken another fallen minister, and now he's calling himself the preacher, and he's taking over this big, huge land tract in Louisiana called, oh God, what is it, parish? Landry Parish, St. Landry Parish, which used to be the biggest parish in Louisiana. So they broke it up in the 1860s, 1870s. But yeah, he was taking over the St. Landry's Parish, had everybody working for him as pirates, and they were just causing hassle. And Big Jim Lynn, or Bountiful Jim, gets a letter from his cousin, who is in the parish, and is asking him for help. And so the Hunter and Jeff Stryker wind up going.
It was interesting that when you did the sequel, and the Return is the sequel, you move the main characters out of their comfort zone, because their comfort zone
absolutely.
is the Southwest, and now they're in this swampy bayou, fighting.
Right.
At some point, they figure out, wait a minute, this is the thing we thought we already beat. Now here it is again.
Exactly. Well, they're used to horses in dry, arid wastelands, and now they're in a swampy swamp in the middle of this parish, and their transportation of these old narrow dugout canoes called pirogues, and that's how they get from place to place. And it's just, I mean, it's you can tell just by listening to their reactions. They hate the boats. They hate them. Like
well, I would imagine that was true for most.
And where am I supposed to sit? Hunter says, well, any place you can.
Just don't tip the boat over. That's all.
Exactly.
Yeah. Don't be rocking around.
But the preacher comes back worse than the Deacon ever thought of being. He is now able to shapeshift, and that's really a lot of the story. That's where the raven and the man come in, because he can transform to a raven, and that's how he finds everything.
Mm-hmm. Well, like I said, I love the way you mixed in the supernatural into this, because it gave it just a little bit extra. Some sequels, it's like, okay, it's the same thing again, but this was completely different from what we saw in the first book, and it was just it worked perfectly. Now we've kind of told our readers out there about your books. For the writers who are watching, what's your writing process? I mean, how do you approach writing these books?
Well, I'm a pantser. I don't think you are, but I am. I will sit right by the seat of my pants, and I don't outline. I always know where the story is going, each chapter, where it starts, where each chapter is going to end, and my job is to get from A to B.
Mm-hmm.
So that's how my storytelling technique works. And I always know I'm always one or two chapters in front of myself when I'm writing a chapter, because I know I have to get to a certain place later on down the book. But I will sit. Sometimes I write in the morning, and sometimes I write in the afternoon. I do better in the morning.
Yeah.
I think most of us do, because we're sharper and clearer headed. And, after the fourth martini, it's a little hard to write. We actually had a writer on the writer's block once that said, here's my philosophy on writing: write drunk, edit sober. Okay.
That works. Yeah. No, I'm kind of a bit of both. I have written down what my starting point is. I write down what we're going to do for the end. So I write the first chapter, I write the last chapter. And after that, it's just, okay, we're going to launch from here, and we'll see how we work our way over and get to that point. So
well, when we wrote The Last Lonely Trail, you handed me a sheet and a half, or actually almost 2 sheets, full of small vignettes about where they should be and what they're doing at that point. I tried to stick to that as much as possible.
Oh, you did. You did. Yeah.
But I'm not. I mean, yeah.
I wanted a basic roadmap.
Different places sometimes.
Yeah, that's okay. But the whole point of that was just here's the basic roadmap.
Right.
Feel free to detour, but make sure we can get back over here when we need.
Exactly.
And it worked. I think it worked really well. I had a lot of fun doing it.
And dialogue to me has to sound like a person talking.
Mm-hmm.
And if it doesn't, you've lost the whole idea.
Yeah.
If you're a Western and you're talking, you're dialoguing as a Western person, and you're using New York slang, it doesn't work.
No. And nor does speaking in perfect English, because nobody does.
Nobody does.
So,
everybody uses colloquialisms. Everybody shortens words. Everybody. So if you can think about what your character is or who he is and how he talks, and once you can pretty much figure it out through the book. And that's why I like the way you had Hall talking the same way, a little more intelligently than Armstrong. Armstrong was an old farm boy from Texas.
Yeah.
And he was a little bit rougher than Hall was.
Well, Hall was also a former Army officer, so he would be expected to, have a little bit more up here.
Exactly. Well, Armstrong wasn't.
No.
Armstrong was a big old farm boy, ranch boy, that got into rangering at a young age, younger, and was pretty rough around the edges. Yeah. But he knew his stuff. And
that was a bit of a challenge, because with Hall, who I did, at the beginning, we're going to tip some people off here. I had the Hall chapters. In the beginning, we had the Armstrong chapters. Well, Hall is a fictional character. There is no Marshall David Hall.
Right.
If there is, I apologize. But with J.B. Armstrong, he was an actual Texas Ranger.
Yes, he was.
And so you had to go and you had to read up on J.B.
I did.
Actually, there was material on. I picked him in part because we had material to work with, because of who he was and who he captured later in his career.
Yeah. We can always say it. Who did he capture? Well, who did he capture, Richard?
He captured John
Wesley Hardin.
Yeah.
There you go.
I was going to make everybody go look it up. We try to inform, educate, and entertain here.
Yeah, he brought him back from Louisiana, actually, or Florida. One of those two.
From Florida, he caught up with him in Florida and hauled him back to Texas, and there you go.
But I couldn't let Armstrong just disappear at the end of that book. I had to bring him back one last time, which actually I think was a little surprise for you.
It was a surprise, but after I read it, it was perfect. That was the perfect way to wrap that book up.
Yep. And there was another nice death.
And there, you and I had actually discussed, the possibility of Hall not surviving the end of the book.
Yes, we did. But we couldn't bring ourselves to do it.
No, I couldn't.
They made such a good team. I mean, there was a begrudging respect between the two men. I don't think they ever would have been friends, but there was a respect there. And that's why one of the last lines in the book is, well, that's Armstrong cleaning things up.
Yeah.
And his wife says, Armstrong, I was kind of like him. He was a likable character.
Yeah, they both were. Now, one thing I do want to say on Jim's behalf and on my behalf too, because I think everybody thinks it's me, there were two people who wrote The Last Lonely Trail. So we appreciate it when you say you want to see more from this author, but please say we'd like to see more from these authors, because there was two of us. It's happened 2 or 3 times now. We're like, we want to see more. Somebody asked about a sequel for the book, and for the life of me, where in the world we'd come up with it.
I don't know. How do you sequel a book that we ended? We virtually ended the story.
I've had with one of my other books, I had the same thing. Somebody goes, they go, when are we going to see the sequel to it? And I'm like, I don't know. And we are frozen. You still with me?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, hang on. It's a brisk 24 degrees outside right now, so everyone we have freezing. So I will apologize for the freezing parts, and I'm going to hope that we can edit those frozen parts later. Now, as we mentioned earlier, about 4 years ago, you started a show called The Writer's Block. And
Yep.
I want to spend a little bit of time talking about that, how that came to be, and how it's working out, because it's not your normal radio show where you get on and people turn on their AM or FM. This is an internet radio show, so it's a little different. Tell us a little bit about it.
It's broadcast on LA Talk Radio on Thursday nights, as you know, at 7 p.m. Pacific, which in your time would be 10.
Yeah.
Is it 2 hours or 3 hours?
No, we're 9. We're 2 hours. It's 10 on the East Coast.
Okay, so 9 o'clock your time, and we talk to writers, songwriters, poets, playwrights, whoever we book on the show, and we go through their material before we get on the air with them, and we discuss not only their book or their play or their songs, but also their process and how they got there, and their history of how they started writing, so much as you just did. And we give them pretty much 40 minutes to tell their story, which is 40 minutes longer than most TV shows give you.
Yeah.
So, and it is live, and it also is podcast. So, like Richard said, if you miss one, you can always go back and get it.
You can every show that you guys have done is sitting in their archives so you can access.
From the first show.
Yeah.
Which I have to tell you, going back and listening to the first show.
Yeah.
And the last show that we did, totally different animal. It's really evolved over the years.
Yeah. Well, I expect the same thing will happen here with this one. I'm going to look back in a couple of years ago.
So, you get looser and you get more comfortable on the air, but I've never dropped the whole thing about not having a format.
Mm-hmm.
Format kind of ties a writer into stuff, and I don't like to do that because, as we all know, writers love talking about themselves.
Yes.
And I would rather let them do that. The only thing I do ask them is to give whatever small little bit of information to the new writers that are listening, because that's pretty much a big part of our audience. And, give whatever information, whatever advice, what they want to give. Great. So it's working out really, really well. Excuse me.
And there's been some good shows. I mean, I'm trying to think. It's John Pielmeyer. Am I pronouncing that right?
Who?
He did Hook's Tale.
Oh, yes.
That was my favorite show because I thoroughly loved reading that book, and so I was having a blast with that show.
Oh my God, wasn't he great?
He was, especially when we got him to read a portion of the book, and I mean, I think I just leaned back and had a religious experience while he was doing that, because it was just, it was wonderful. The one show that really sticks out was the time when we were trying to get hold of the guest, and we kept getting that number is disconnected, or you cannot.
Yes.
So we're sitting in the studio. I think everybody's hair is on fire. We finally get the guy on after 5 minutes, and I'm reading the opening ad, which we do live on the show. And in the middle of this, he yells out to somebody, "I'm upstairs on the cell phone. My phone died. I'm upstairs on the phone." Yeah.
That actually turned out to be one of our most fun shows.
It was. I think you and I finally bowed to the inevitable and just rolled with it. So.
Yeah, well, that's all you can do. It's like, and one of my favorite shows was when John Sanford was on with us last year, just before the Cowboy Festival.
Yeah.
And his comment about writer's block was absolutely phenomenal. And I'm going to use it as the title of a book.
There you go.
He says, remember we asked him, did you ever get writer's block? And if you do, and he said, well, if I get stuck, I just bring in a guy with a gun. I thought, how apropos is that? We're talking to John Sanford, Lucas Davenport, Prey novels. I bring in a guy with a gun.
Works every time. It'll get your story jump started. Guy shows up with a gun, right?
We've had some wonderful guests on. We've had beginning writers all the way up to New York Times best-selling authors, Pulitzer Prizers.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So, I mean, the word gets out.
And I've discovered some people to start reading just by listening to your show. Even when I wasn't on, I'd be catching the show and it's like, hey, I want to check that out. So now, if you had any advice you want to give to somebody who's just starting out as a writer, what would you tell them?
Tell your story.
That
Tell
work?
your story. It's exactly what my creative writing teacher said. Tell your story. Don't worry about how it's written down. That can be fixed. If it's a good story, it'll always be fixed correctly.
Yep.
But tell your story.
And then go get yourself a really good editor.
And editor is key.
Yeah.
Thank God my wife is a good editor.
Well, I managed
She did a great job with Last Lonely Trail.
Yeah, yes, she did. I found a very good editor who does my sci-fi for me. In fact, you had her on your show recently, about last week, I think.
Dawn, last Thursday, yeah.
So she
Dawn Greenfield, Ireland.
Yes, and she
Wonderful lady.
Yes, she is, and she
had a ball. She sent me a really long email and said thank you, and she was just like all the Twitter, and she was like, she thought she was going to really blow it, and she just had a wonderful time. And she called Bob Brill Bill at the end of the show. So now she has a new name for him, Bill Bob.
Bill Bob. We could have fun with that. And just ask Johnny Boggs what Jim and I do when we're together and we want to be
Oh
honored.
my God. Johnny is such a wonderful guy, and just, I mean, great writer and a good friend, but what a sense of humor that man has. He has to. He hung around us.
Yeah, but he'll never, ever tell us again what somebody mistook
to him in a parking lot. Yeah.
He was mistaken.
But anyway, the writer's block. I was on Bobby Jean used to have a show in Santa Clarita Valley years back, and I was on that show. Every time a new book came out, she booked me on her show. And I got to talking with Jerry one day, and I said, you know what? This could be something that could take off, is to have just writers on, because she used to have all kinds of guests, but we'd limit it to just writers of all kinds, and give them the forum of the whole hour or 50 minutes. And so we figured the writer's block, what a great name for a show. So we sat down and we put it together. Bobby Jean was always my first choice for co-host. And she's good at what she does.
Yeah.
But, it's evolved since then, of course. We've gone through 2 in-studio co-hosts, and now we have one in-studio and one traversing West areas.
Well, Bobby moved first. She moved to Albuquerque, and then
she did, and then you took her spot.
Yeah, and then I had
to move to
Nebraska.
And then we have Bob Brell, who does a good job. He's very credible. Of course, he's been in radio for 100 years.
I was going to say I remember listening to him on KNX.
KNX. KNX.
Back in the 80s. So yeah, I knew he was going to be fine. So
he's
about where we can find you online and where we can find your books, so people can go read those wonderful stories.
Well, you can find me at jimchristina.net. You can find me at blackdogpublishing.co. You can find me at tuscanybaybooks.com. You can find me at Facebook/Jim Christina. Email address is always jimchristina@yahoo.com.
Perfect. And go on Amazon. All of his books are.
All my stuff is on Amazon. All online booksellers.
Yeah.
You can, and if you go to Citrus College, you can go to the bookstore and buy them.
There you go, because that's where Jonah Blue is for sure.
Where Jonah Blue is.
And for those of you who were listening earlier when I did the Tuscany Bay Books ad, this is the J. Christina in J. Christina. So now you know who you're talking to when you give them a call. Jim, I appreciate you coming on, brother. I really do. You were the first guest, so you've got that place.
Yeah, I know. I actually announced this last week on the show.
Excellent. Well, hopefully it'll be. Hopefully, a lot of people will swing by and give it a look.
I certainly hope so. And incidentally, I own 9 more ISBN numbers.
Ooh.
Tuscany Bay Books.
Okay.
So
well,
you let me know when you need one. I've already used one on Jefferson's Chance.
See how you
are. I know. What are you gonna do?
Jim,
Well,
the book you need to write, and I'm going to extend this for just a few
I
minutes.
know we talked about one.
You need to take the 10 years you were in the Army and
Yeah.
write about that, especially how you became a helicopter pilot, because I love the way the Army makes you a helicopter pilot.
It's 9.5 months of hell.
Yeah.
Actually, it's 10.5 months of hell.
And not to mention the tell me you got a Purple Heart for this one.
But
The injury to the nose.
oh yeah, that was in Vietnam though. That was some North Vietnamese guy jumped in my hole with me.
Yeah, but tell me you got a
Yeah.
Purple Heart for that, right?
I got actually 2 Purple Hearts.
You should have, yes. If Jim ever tells that story, it's not for the faint at heart.
Oh no, it hurt.
I told a Coast Guard friend of mine what happened, and he has seen everything and was in Vietnam as well. And I have never seen him turn that shade of green before. It was, yeah.
Well, that's what the nurses look like too at 21st and back. So
yeah. Yeah, so you definitely got to write that book. And the snake, the other one was the one I was thinking of.
Oh, the snake, yeah.
Yeah, those will be some good stories, sir. All right, well, we appreciate you coming on. We're gonna
brother.
Here, we're gonna take a brief time out, a couple of final messages, and we'll come back and we'll wrap up the show. Thanks again, Jim.
I'm gonna stick around and watch the end of your show, though.
You better.
Okay.
Somebody does. All right, sir. We'll see you later, and we'll be right back. And we're back, and thank you to Jim for being on the show. He got the #1 slot. He's our first guest, and what a guest, and what an incredible life this man's lived. We mentioned in the interview he should write a story about his days in the Army. It would be an amazing read, and it would be all true, and you would probably think half of it's made up, but it's not, and especially the nose thing. Ooh. It makes my face hurt every time I think about the story he told, and I think he should do that soon, but we'll see if he does. We managed to get through a couple of technical glitches. Unfortunately, the one day we scheduled to have Jim on the show, we got a snowstorm. And hopefully I can cut to a very quick photo of what it looks like outside. Yeah, you see. Anyway, we got through. Hopefully it doesn't show up too much in the interview. And thank you to Jim for soldiering through that like he did, and for just being a great guest. We got some more people coming up that are going to be equally as wonderful. We mentioned in the interview with Jim, Dawn Greenfield, Ireland. Dawn is my editor for my last couple of science fiction projects. Actually, I think the last 2. She also worked with me on a very special book that we're going to talk about in a couple of weeks when she's on. It's called Eerie, and we both worked on the project. Neither one of us will have our name on it, though, and we'll explain how that all works and why we went to the lengths we did to work on that. I think that should probably do it for the first show. We're going to get out of here before the snow sinks us. And so in the meantime, readers, please keep reading. Writers, please keep writing. and keep walking the path of a scribe's journey. We'll see you next week.
This has been a Scribe's Journey with your host, Richard Paulinelli, a Tuscany Bay Productions presentation.